Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the Labour Party Manifesto policy proposals which have been published on Labour List ahead of what is effectively the final hurdles before finalising the manifesto, the actual manifesto for next year. I'd like to discuss what I think are probably the 6 most impactful policies, or maybe they're just my favourites, should they find themselves in the manifesto. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So just to point out, all of these policies have a very credible chance of finding their way on Labour's manifesto. These are not just random proposals. They've already gone through lots of stages, met approval every step of the way, had leadership approval. It's really just a case of facing a final bit of scrutiny to make sure that they're deliverable and sensible to form part of a general election offer. If they tick both those boxes now, they basically all go through. It's not certain that all of them will make that final cut, but the vast majority of them now surely will. Otherwise, there's no manifesto. And it is, as I say, possible all of them will. I have discussed, I think, all of these before to an extent, because the proposals have been flying around for some time. It's just that now they're almost at the stage of becoming firm policies. So in no particular order, I want to go over what I think would be the 6 policies which might represent the most obvious reforms. The first being changes to voting age. Now, it's now the case that anyone of 16 years or older can vote for the Scottish and Welsh parliamentary elections. It always seemed a nonsense to many people that you can pay taxes, join the army at 16, but not vote for the MPs who will be spending those taxes or telling you which part of the world to go and die in. In reality, this is not a new Labour policy. This has actually been in manifestos as far back as when Gordon Brown contested the election in 2010. In fact, it's been a bit of a jinx, really, if you think about it, ever since it was adopted as formal manifesto policy. It's been beaten in every general election since. But Labour are going to crack it this time. And addressing an obvious democratic deficit like this should then finally be realised. Yes, young people are not known for voting in large numbers, but that's not the point. There's no reason why 16 or 17-year-olds should not vote if they choose to. Second would be their policies for water companies. Now, many on the left feel that Starmer is sort of pulling back from a programme of nationalisation of public services. But they're dead wrong. He's absolutely going ahead with it. He's doing it in a realistic way. Because there are explicit plans for nationalising rail, of course, and beginning the process of nationalising energy. But there's something in water as well. See, you can't just take over water companies. People say, oh, just nationalise them. See, the thing is then you'd be taking all their debts as well. So you'd instantly ramp up the national debt. Bills wouldn't get any cheaper. People wouldn't see the benefit for years because you need to deal with that. And the Tories would attack Labour as piling on the national debt for no benefit. They'd say to people, have you noticed an improvement in your water or water bills? Well, no, because that's not going to happen overnight. It'd be impossible to prove that Labour haven't just whacked up national debt for an ideological reason, because the benefits wouldn't be here for years. The Tories would come straight back in, sell it all off cheap to their mates again. The debt stays there, belonging to the state, and will forevermore be described as Labour's debt of folly. But as I've said in the past, what if Labour make life uncomfortable for the water companies? Force them to deliver proper services without just passing on excessive costs to the customer. It would need a tough regulator as well to stop companies paying their fines just passing on the cost to the consumer. Well, this is the current policy proposal. Mandatory targets on water leaks, more regulatory powers to keep water bills down. Make sure the company pays for the failures, not the consumer. But look at this as well. Company directors who keep ignoring their responsibilities to be struck off. Ooh. Also, automatic fines for sewage discharges. No excuses. Now, if these go through, this is hitting them where it hurts. It will certainly mean the licence to print money is revoked, because it's like water company, oh, you're going to fine us? Oh, yeah, we'll just put our prices up. No, you won't. What do you mean, no, we won't? No, you'll pay for it. And it may well create the conditions by which the government can, in time, nationalise water companies when they decide to abandon it as no longer a suitable business model for them. You know, in the same way that they're picking up rail companies now. I mean, the Tory government have just nationalised another rail company, LNER. You know, it's a longer term approach to dealing with privatisation, but it's also one that doesn't mean being exposed as fiscally irresponsible because it's the water companies paying, not the Treasury. Third, action on another privatised service, Royal Mail this time. Now, this is more recently privatised by Cameron. Royal Mail have recently been trying to offload their unprofitable services, and the row has ended up causing the CEO to basically resign. But the threat is always there. See, a private company will always seek to maximise profit. I mean, that's fine. That's how the system works. So a privatised public service will do the same. They will seek to avoid providing services which don't make money. But it's a public service. You know, that's why privatisation and public services don't really run together. But these policy proposals would force Royal Mail to provide these services. You wanted to provide these services. You wanted to buy Royal Mail. Right, these are the services Royal Mail offers. You will offer them. And prevent them being broken up and sold off to what is being termed gig economy employers. The fourth would be the new terms of reference for the UK Infrastructure Bank. Now, this sounds quite dull, but it could be incredibly impactful. So the idea is public money would go to those who commit to providing good jobs with decent conditions. Workers would be represented on the board. So it's a reverse process of what the Conservatives done with the NHS. So the NHS, for example, the trust boards now have on them representatives of private healthcare companies. So clear conflict of interest there. So this is like the reverse of that. This is for the UK Infrastructure Bank saying, right, we need workers on the board making decisions as well here. And they would have to publish their work. So they'd be encouraged to make sure that they're spreading investments around the country, not loading it all up around London. Because the big problem for any government that actually wants to genuinely address regional inequality is how do you do it? It's not straightforward. Investment decisions are, understandably enough, made on the basis of the best return. That's what investment is. But that tends to then focus investment around the financial black hole of London, which just sucks everything into it. What's needed is a mindset of still prioritising good investments, but where a more equitable distribution around the country is also pursued. Because this is how you would actually do levelling up. Not carrying on with the old system and then just calling any funding which happens to find itself landing outside the London area, oh, we'll just call that levelling up funding. No, that was funding that was always there. Levelling up was one of the main planks of the Tories' manifesto promises in 2019, yet regional disparity has worsened since they won that election. Not just that it hasn't improved, it's actively got worse. That's because it was all words. There was never a plan. Now there is. Fifth would be taxation. A series of policies which essentially remove tax breaks from those who don't need them. Often, if you look at the tax that wealthy people and businesses will pay, in theory, it can look reasonable. You look at it in the press, and it's like, oh, you know, they're paying this much tax, and that sounds very reasonable. But the reality is they're not paying that much tax. Because what you don't see under the bonnet are all the schemes designed to allow the very wealthy to get out of paying their tax bills. Tax breaks, right? Oh, if you do this thing, which doesn't actually help anyone, we'll give you a tax. We'll let you get out of your tax. Dealing with that means an increase in tax revenue without having to put up the rate of tax at all. Because the Conservatives will say, oh, Labour will just raise your taxes. Well, Labour can say, no, it won't. They don't have to. To raise more tax revenues, they don't have to. They just have to make sure that people pay the right rate of tax. But the really interesting policy for me is where it says cracking down on tax evasion and tax avoidance. Now, tax evasion has been conspicuously ignored by the Tories and Rishi Sunak in particular. The Conservatives and their client media distract people with tales of benefit fraud, which is literally the tip of the iceberg, without pointing out the much greater amount of corporate fraud, which would be cheaper to pursue and give better returns. Another source of tax revenues which the Tories are ignoring and doesn't even need Labour to again raise taxes to get. Just make sure people are paying taxes properly. But then tax avoidance. Now, tax avoidance is, of course, legal. So this is a policy which means changing that. Now, we know that Labour are going to scrap non-dom status. But saying cracking down on tax avoidance rather than specifically naming non-doms, if that is the wording that goes on the manifesto, and the wording here is not necessarily the wording that goes in the manifesto, the article makes that clear. But if it is, that might imply they've got other tax avoidance schemes in mind as well. Now, consider that one powerful motivator for Tory Brexiteers was escaping the EU anti-tax avoidance directives. They came out a few years ago. I wonder if Labour would plan on doing something very similar, if not identical. You know, they wouldn't have to put out detailed proposals in the manifesto. They can just put that line. cracking down on tax evasion and tax avoidance without really saying anything. You know, just as it's written there. And that is enough of a mandate to take whatever action they deem necessary against any form of tax avoidance. It would give them the authority to tackle any and all forms of tax evasion and tax avoidance if they had a plan to do so. I think it's very interesting. And then sixth, this is of course not new at all. This one's definitely going in the manifesto, no doubts about it, because Keir Starmer has personally put his shoulder behind it, abolishing the House of Lords. You know, as I say, we know that's one's going in. That is one of Starmer's personal ones. We don't know the full details yet, but it can't be anything other than hugely impactful. Instead of political appointments who mostly live in London, we will have elected members of a second chamber who are distributed around the country as evenly as in the House of Commons. Now, there are lots of other significant reforms mentioned in the document as well. By all means, read it. Closing the loopholes for the fox hunting ban, which currently doesn't actually ban fox hunting. Insourcing, massive insourcing of public services. One of those Starmer leadership pledges, which the Trots keep trying to say he's reneged on. Of course, he hasn't. A fair work standard, which means that when there is outsourcing, the businesses who treat their workers well are prioritised for the government contracts. That'll make a difference, because at the moment, the ones who bung some Tories 20 grand are the ones who are prioritised. The promise to introduce the Employment Rights Bill within the first 100 days, as well as a commitment to repeal any anti-strike legislation that the Tories are currently introducing in the same period. That was Angela Rayner discussed that, might have been yesterday actually, but certainly this week. So within a few months of a Labour government coming to power, workers will immediately gain new legal rights. Not just have a government that's more invested in their welfare running things. No, solid legal rights will improve within 3 months. Quite a lot of things in there, really. Now, as I said, it's not the manifesto. They've still got to face that final bit of scrutiny. But these are the ones from which the manifesto will be chosen. So it is quite possible that what this is basically the manifesto with a little bit of tweaking. Because these ideas they haven't come up new. They've been developed over the past few years. This is the end game for them. The vast majority of them are going to be in the manifesto. It could easily be the case that all of them are. It will also render useless the Tories' attempts to say Labour have no policies. It's not even true now. But I must say, Labour would do themselves a favour if they just publish their current policies in one easy to find place on their website. You can just direct people there. But it's not that big a deal, because come the general election, when it matters, the campaign, the manifesto will be out. Nobody will be able to deny not only the welfare policies, but the transformational nature of them. You know, articles going around at the moment, oh, you know, what's Starmer going to do? Just tinkering around the edges, tinkering around the edges. Oh, yeah. Read those and tell me that's tinkering around the edges. And when they're in, because at the moment they're proposals, but once they're in the manifesto, it will be impossible to say they're anything other than transformational. Absolutely impossible. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.